Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will show up here in my chat room. And we can talk directly. And today, our subject for discussion is the difference between an influencer and a leader. And this is a subject I have picked off of Ed the Pagan's Facebook page. And as you know, if you follow Ed the Pagan's Facebook page, he frequently asks various questions of the community to see what people think. And this is one that I have talked about periodically. We have talked about periodically for many years, long before the term influencer was actually being used. And it has some importance to our political conversations that we have, because one of the things that I talk about um, on this program are leadership skills, and there is a difference between being in a position of leadership and being in a position of influence, even though these often overlap. And I'm going to try to talk about that a little bit today. They're also talking about elder care, and hello to Renee in the chat room. Elder care on Ed the Pagan's page, and we'll probably be talking about that later this week. And as you know, we are working with Gaia Thrift as an elder care ministry, and attempting to create um, elder care resources here in Danville. With myself as the first targeted elder, and hello to Magical Mermaid in the chat room. It's good to see you, Magical Mermaid. And we were talking earlier about this also. And a number of people are talking about elder care as being focused on the people who are um, the most incapacitated at the end of their life, etc. And we're really looking more at elders who are still ambulatory, still functional, but in need. Uh, our point of view is that the people who are truly incapacitated, the people who need round the clock care, do have access to a number of resources through the community, at least here in Illinois, um, more so than the people who are still ambulatory. So we're hoping to provide a richer end of life um, for elders who are still in a functional position, still able to contribute to society, but maybe not able to completely handle everything themselves. People who are in kind of my own situation. Um, and we'll probably talk about that more maybe on Thursday. We shall see. And hello to Lolan in the chat room. It's good to see you. And after all the trouble I had getting this show up yesterday, no problems at all today. Which on one hand is good, on the other hand, it's still frustrating. When you're working with a paid service like Restream, I just don't expect that sort of thing to happen um, nearly as often as it's happening. Even though today it was flawless. I'm not entirely certain that today being flawless doesn't actually make it worse, because it raises to me the question: were the problems that happened yesterday merely carelessness on their part in their attempts to fix what really wasn't broken? I was talking yesterday about why it's not always a good idea to try to fix what is not actually broken, because frequently you only break it further, or you will cause breaks that aren't already there. And that to me is kind of what Restream has done to itself. I've been using it now for quite a long time and had no problems at all until they started trying to make it better, and inadvertently made it harder in many ways to certainly to rely on. For weeks now, the program has not been going out the way it should be. It's been going out, But some days certain pages don't appear, other days other weird things happen, and I just really don't like that aspect. Magical Mermaid says, oh, and Lowland says Cyber Monday. Well, yeah, that may have contributed to it. It was Cyber Monday yesterday, and that it may be that the systems were a bit overwhelmed. Magical Mermaid says, I make myself work out and try to get physical activity every day, especially as I age. That's actually quite important. Um, they say use it or lose it. And as you get older, I think that tends to be true. And yeah, I trying to do that myself as much as possible. And I think that's a very important thing for us to focus on. All of us, really, as we age, including those of us who are nowhere near aging, to have it in our minds now that you have to keep living if you wish to keep living. You cannot just sit back and rust on the shelf unless you expect to get rusty. And if we want to remain in good working order, we have to keep working. And I think that's a very important thing. Now, getting back to what I had said would be our subject today, leaders versus influencers. This is a subject they're talking about on Ed the Pagan's page. And I've talked about it for some time because I think often in the pagan community, there is an inability to tell the difference between these two things. Um, Very often, because of the structure of our community, people mistake people who are influencers, who are important, for being actual leaders, which is a different thing. Influencers in our community historically have been authors, but an author is not remotely necessarily a leader in any meaningful sense. They may be. These things can overlap, and that's important to say. But writing a book does not make you a leader. It doesn't mean you know what you wrote about. Doesn't mean you actually know your subject. That requires actually doing things. And leadership can have different definitions. For this purpose, I'm going to say that it's actually taking actions and achieving results. And in this case, within the community, that often involves having a position within a group, but it doesn't necessarily. I can think of a number of people who did have leadership positions in groups, but who achieved the height of their leadership standing outside of that. One of them is Abby Willowroot. And I've talked about Abby Willowroot on this program before. She was a great leader of this community, in my opinion. And the biggest thing she ever did was the Goddess 2000 project, which many people no longer remember, but they should. It was the first intertraditional, multinational project successfully accomplished in the pagan community, in my opinion. And she did this in the late 1990s, and it was an art project. Totally non-political, totally non-theological, except in that its focus was the feminine aspect of deity, and the idea was to have a goddess artwork on every corner. And this was a leadership position because it created a very particular effect. It actually got people doing artwork. It got them doing shows of their artwork. And when the year 2000 came, the Goddess 2000 project had art shows around the world of goddess artwork. It was a successful project. It was a limited project. It was very much a wonderful demonstration of what leadership can be, without being the effect of a particular organization. Many organizations involve themselves around the edges with it, but the Goddess 2000 project itself was just a group of like-minded people working together under the leadership of Abby and a few other people to create this wonderful thing. Leadership can also be far more structured. I have been in a position of leadership most of my life within the Correllian tradition, still am, and that is a specific office. And I'm now in that office in a state of retirement, but still in office and still involved in a number of things. That's a kind of leadership because it sets policies that create actions. And in that position of leadership, we reformed our teaching materials, totally rewrote them, created standardized teaching materials, which we had not originally had, and created not one but several ways to teach them. And now have made them available more or less in public domain through a Creative Commons license. And um, it was a position from which a great many things could be done. An influencer, on the other hand, is not taking actions, but basically stating opinions. Stating opinions, offering ideas, maybe teaching. Um, and this is important. And influencers can also be leaders, and leaders can be influencers. And I tried to point out to people, well, what I'm doing today with Midday with Rev Don, this is influencing. When you do a program like this, you are an influencer. The things you're saying may influence people's opinions, may influence their ideas, may influence the actions they take. But it's not the same thing as being in a position of leadership, because you're not telling anyone, this is what we're doing now. This is the action we want to take. You're telling them what you think would be good, and they make up their own mind. And this too is important, but they're different things. But I tried to tell people for many years that my actual power over these many years was largely due not to my position as a leader, which gave me certain abilities, but more to my position as an influencer through the media, which has been there for many, many years now. Really throughout my entire career, because even before the 20 years we've been doing Magic TV / Correllian TV, I was doing I was doing written publications like The Wheel of Hecate, work with Psychic Chicago magazine, the Roundtable magazine. I've been in the influencing business for a long time, longer than that word has existed. And Lolan says, "I'm a lazy influencer," and that's great. That's a lovely phrase. And yes, Lolan is an influencer. Lolan runs, that I know of, Facebook groups, which is a form of influence that can be quite effective, and I'm sure many other things as well, as do I for that matter. Influencing is very important. However, it's also important to bear in mind the difference between an influencer who may or may not know what they're doing and a leader who will have an actual track record for what they're doing. Um, and I don't want to. I want to be careful of mentioning anyone by name. I noticed Magical Mermaid in the chat room has pointed out Jack LaLanne versus Jane Fonda in the exercise world as an example of this. So yeah, there are certainly places where, well, the two subjects do to some extent overlap, and which is more powerful as a position can be hard to say, because influencers can carry a great deal of weight, and sometimes more than someone in a position of actual leadership. But on the other hand, the person who's in a position of actual leadership has actual authority to take certain actions, whereas a person in a position of influence is merely influencing people's opinion. And I will give you an example that doesn't actually involve anyone's name but mine, because I'm not big on mentioning names. But years ago, at least 10 years ago, one of the various lustrations which we hold in the Correllian tradition um, provided me with a security detail, and they were quite showy with shirts that said security on them, and there was a photo of me with the two security guards, and people reacted to this in various ways, and we had just finished a multinational um, blow up over certain political incidents. I don't know that I actually needed security, but the people running that lustration thought that I did, or at least wanted to make a show of it. And one of the responses that film or that photo brought was someone who was outraged over it and said, "Well, there are name authors who don't have security." An author is not a leader. Um, yes, authors don't usually have security. They don't usually need it. If they need it, they will get it. I would assume. The position I was in at that time was the leader of a specific organization which had just had a difficult situation and at a specific event where there were some fears about things possibly going out of control. Very, very different situations. At the recent investiture, there were armed guards for fear of a similar upset. Nothing of that sort happened, but the Order of Paladins did have armed security present in case it did, because it could have, because we're dealing with a position of um, actual leadership structures which can come to that kind of situation. Magical Mermaid says leaders have a genuine weight where influencers help shape and shift the status quo. That kind of describes it. Um, I think part of the difference is, as an influencer, I can say to you that, well, let's go back 20 years ago. As an influencer, I can say to you that I think um, first degree clergy should be able to do all of the familial rites, um, either on their own or with Imperium, um, from a third degree, such as coming of age, hand fasting, burial, etc., but not initiations. And having said that, that's what I've got to offer to the conversation. As a leader, I could set the policy. Yes, in this tradition, first degrees have the authority to do those particular rituals under those circumstances, and I did. Because that was part of my authority as leader of tradition. And um, that kind of is the difference. Now, the other difference between an influencer and a leader is that if, as an influencer, I had made such a statement and people went out and implemented it and it went badly, nothing came back to me. I just made an opinion. If, as a leader, it had gone badly, which it did not, it would have come back to me. And the other very important thing here is that a leader also carries consequences for their actions, whereas an influencer, the only consequences they normally carry are the consequences to their own popularity. But if their advice is um, totally off the chart, it really doesn't matter to anything. It won't come back to them. And I have to tell you, in my opinion, a lot of influencers are totally off the chart in a lot of their ideas. And I will give you an example of, without naming names, but I've talked for many months now about Project 2025, and I feel that circumstances are bearing out exactly what I said. But there were other people in a position of being influencers saying, "Oh, this is nonsense. Don't worry about this. This is nothing. We shouldn't be worried about this. Blah blah blah." Um, what's to be said? They were totally, in my opinion, off the mark. But what does it matter? They were only influencers. The people who are in positions where I am in a position of leadership have listened to this, partly because they did not necessarily have a lot of choice, but you always do have choice. But there are places where I have put things into effect to deal with this. Um, and other people in positions of leadership have done so, because that's what a leader can do. Um, I hope as we go forward through the next year, we'll be putting many more things into effect in terms of how to deal with this. It is um, it's going to be an interesting time. And do I think there's nothing we can do? I never think there's nothing you can do. What will we do? Well, we'll be talking more about it. But the one thing we must not do is be hysterical, um, act without thinking, or be foolish. We must use the resources we have to build our bases, to build our community, and to stand strong through what may be challenging times. And there you go. Um, and yeah, there'll be a lot more talk about that. But this is where an influencer deals with opinion, and a leader deals with action. As an influencer, I can say this to you, and I'll be talking about it on my program, and you will put into practice whatever seems right to you. Because on this program, I am an influencer. But if you are in an organization where I'm in a position of leadership, there will be policies that are set. Um, Now, those positions where I am setting policies are smaller than they used to be, um, but they're still there. And it's very important for us, in my opinion, to be ready for these things. So, insofar as I can be a policy setter, which is the role of a leader, I will be doing that. And insofar as I can be an opinion setter, which is the role of an influencer, I'll be doing that. But they are very different roles. They should not be confused for one another. One of the things that they've been talking about on Ed the Pagan's page uh, is leaders who you would trust on certain issues. Another one is leaders who might belong in a hall of fame or other situations identifying leaders. And I notice that many of the people being named are influencers were never leaders in any meaningful sense, and in some cases in no sense at all. Our community doesn't seem to know the difference, and that explains a lot when you look at the history of our community. Um, and then, of course, you've got the people saying, "Oh, there can't be any leaders," and I just personally don't think we really need those people. I don't think they can help any situation. They merely bog us down. And I'm kind of tired of it. I think we're past the point that we can be that lazy and coddle that point of view. Um, I certainly understand that you don't necessarily want yourself to be under a particular leader, but the idea that no one should be leading anything is just stupid, and that's all there is to it. Um, and that is a blunt opinion for you. And the Magical Mermaid says notoriety blurs the narrative. Well, yes, it does. And, I want to say again, both of these positions are powerful, but in very different ways. And, I tried to point out, I guess I will mention a name of someone I worked with for many years, Stephanie Neal. Many, many times I tried to point out to her that my ability to get things done relied every bit, if not more, on my position as an influencer than as a leader. Because my leadership position did not give me all of the ability that I actually held. My ability to shape opinion and to persuade people was a great deal of it also. She did not listen and relied entirely on the idea that I said so, therefore it must be. And that never works. You cannot command people, with very few exceptions. You have to lead them. You have to influence them. You have to convince them. It is never I command you and you must type of situation. And if you make that mistake as a leader, you're doomed. And as Stephanie was, and she destroyed herself within a matter of months, which was heartbreaking. After 20 years working with her, it was heartbreaking. Particularly because had she only listened to me, she would have known better. And so I hope that you will listen to me when I say to you, never think that you're going to command people to do what you want. That does not work. You have to be prepared to persuade them, to show them why you're right. And if you're not right, you have to be prepared to change. Because you're not always going to be right. Sometimes you'll be wrong, and then you have to change. And there's nothing wrong with changing. If you find that the policy that you formerly thought was great just didn't work, well, then you need a new policy. And you have to be willing to be constantly evolving, constantly growing, or you're not a leader. You're just an overgrown baby throwing temper tantrums. We've all seen that kind of leader. And it's not pretty, and there's no room for it in the present day. We need people who will use intelligence and compassion and diplomacy in leading forward in difficult circumstances, because these are the only things that are going to work. We also need people who will pay attention to what works, not just what they want in the moment. So with that, I see we're coming to the end of our half hour, and we must take a moment for a word from our sponsors. And why do we have a word from our sponsors? Because we love our sponsors. And here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. I will let you know when the next auction is coming. We had thought we might be doing one today. I don't believe we are, but I'm sure there will be one soon. And I hope that you've enjoyed today's program. And we have come to the end of our half hour. Tomorrow, I will be back with my regular Wednesday guest, Chris Copeland. We'll be talking probably about Reverend Don's Book of Stones, Metals, and Crystals, and everything else that's new at Corellian Publishing. And with that, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to always find the best ways to go about the things we wish to do in life. Help us to know the difference between leadership and forcing situations. Help us to know how to influence people for the better, how to influence the world for the better, in building that change we want to see and that change we want to be. And help us to know that leadership by example is always the best leadership. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. And knowing you are always with us, we thank you for your presence. And may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you again